At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's General G. Let's begin. The Chiran Dreadnought's deck hummed. A low thrum Gavin felt in the soles of his boots. Gunnery Sergeant Gavin Fallon walked down the shuttle ramp. Each step a measured impact on the grated deck. The sound echoed in the cavernous space, a low metronome against the Dreadnought's low thrumming engines. His boots, polished to a black gloss, reflected the harsh lighting. His dress uniform pressed with creases sharp enough to cut. The sole contrast, a plain briefcase of dark gray composite handcuffed to his left wrist. Two Chiran guards flanked the ramp's base. They were immense, their frames broad as bulkhead doors, a construction of muscle and fur built on a scale that made Fallon feel like a relic from a smaller, less serious world. Sleek black fur, broken by stripes of gunmetal gray, covered powerful bodies that moved with a predator's fluid economy of motion. Polished plating, etched with clan markings, adorned their forearms and shoulders. Each possessed 4 eyes, a pair of large, forward-facing oculars that remained fixed on him, and a smaller, secondary pair set wider, tracking his surroundings with unnerving independence. One of them growled, a low vibration that Fallon felt in his teeth. He ignored it. He kept his gaze fixed forward, his jaw set. He was a messenger. A third Chiran approached, his steps inaudible on the deck plating, his weight shifting with the predator's economy. This one carried himself differently. He wore simple armor plates, a deep blue sash over a simple tunic that accentuated his formidable physique. Smooth, dark horns curled back from his temples, and his fur was immaculate. He stopped 5 paces away, his shoulders back and chin slightly raised. "I am Diplomat Warrior Trevor," he said, his resonant baritone articulating each word with deliberate care. "I am to be your host. On behalf of Emperor Cerilius the Unyielding, I welcome you to the Chiran Dominion flagship, Unyielding Resolve." Fallon remained silent. He waited. Trevor narrowed his primary eye slightly. "We were expecting a diplomat, or at least an envoy with the authority to offer terms. Humanity sends a lone soldier to plead for its lost colony?" Fallon remained silent. His silence was the answer. A muscle in Trevor's jaw jumped before he relaxed it. "Well, follow me. The Emperor attends to other matters. You will speak with me until he has time to hear your petition." The Chiran diplomat turned and walked. Fallon fell into step 3 paces behind him. The guards fell in behind Fallon, their heavy footfalls a constant, rhythmic presence. Trevor led him on a deliberate tour. They passed hangar bays filled with angular, predatory strike craft. They walked through corridors lined with ranks of Chiran warriors who paused in their duties to stare. Some tilted their heads, while others bared their teeth. Some made a guttural clicking sound, a Chiran approximation of a snarl. Trophies adorned the walls, the shattered prow of a cruiser, the tattered banners of a dozen forgotten species. An entire section held captured armor and weapons, displayed like hunting prizes. Fallon kept his gaze steady, focused on the back of Trevor's head. He cataloged the ship's layout, the placement of security checkpoints, the guard patrol patterns. He noticed the displays, the stares, the clicking snarls, and filed them as tactical data. "Our empire is vast, Gunnery Sergeant," Trevor said, his words echoing in a high-ceilinged atrium. "Nomadic. We take what we need to survive, to prosper. Meridian, a fallow world, held a sparse population. Your people were occupying a resource node we required. Its annexation was a necessity of our nature." "I see," Fallon said. Trevor stopped before a heavy hexagonal door. "Here, We will speak in here." He placed a hand on a panel and the door hissed open, revealing a stark chamber containing only a table and 2 chairs. The walls were a cage of dark metal that absorbed the light. A single table sat in the center. A disk of white light in the ceiling provided the only illumination, casting sharp shadows. Fallon walked past Trevor and into the room. The Chiran watched him, his primary and secondary eyes tracking Fallon's every movement. The panel hissed shut behind him, the locking mechanism's thud final and definitive. Trevor gestured to a chair. "Sit." Fallon remained standing. He surveyed the room. The seamless walls, ceiling, and floor concealed any surveillance devices, though their presence was a certainty. "As I was saying," Trevor said, taking the seat opposite, "the terms for Meridian's vassalage are quite generous. Your colonists may remain, provided they swear fealty to the Emperor and meet production quotas. A tithe, you would call it. In return, they receive the Chiran Dominion's protection." Fallon lifted his cuffed wrist and placed the attached briefcase on the table with a soft click. He took the seat opposite Trevor. "Vassalage is off the table," Fallon said, his voice level. "My only term is the unconditional and immediate withdrawal of all Chiran forces from the Meridian system." Trevor's lips curled into a smile. "A soldier in your position makes requests. Demands are for those with power." "I am," Fallon replied. The Chiran laughed, a series of deep, guttural clicks that sounded like stone scraping stone. "Truly? What leverage do you imagine you possess? Does that case contain some great treasure? The collected wealth of your small world offered as tribute?" "It contains a trigger," Fallon said. He laid his cuffed hand on the table, palm up. The cuff was a simple dark band flush against his skin. "Biometrics link it to me, to my heart, to my brain. It's part of a system your science division will find on our public networks. The network lists it as the Jericho Protocol." Trevor's smile vanished. His posture stiffened. "And what does this Jericho Protocol do?" Fallon leaned forward slightly, meeting the Chiran's gaze. "A network of probes surrounds the Meridian system. We deployed them into the Oort cloud decades ago. If this trigger activates, they fire coordinated gravity lances into the system's star. It will induce a premature supernova," he finished in a whisper. "My heart stops, the star dies. Any attempt to disable me, a coma, cryostasis, severing the limb, the mechanism interprets as a hostile event. The result is the same. The device is fail deadly." He leaned back in his chair. "So, you can have Meridian, or you can have a future. You have 48 hours to make a choice." On the unyielding Resolve's bridge, every officer stood frozen at their station. Emperor Cerilius the Unyielding, a massive, scarred Chiran with gold rings piercing his horns, stared at the shimmering, life-sized hologram of the negotiation room projected over the central command tank. The audio feed crackled with the human's final statement. "A bluff!" Cerilius roared, a sound that shook the deck plates. He slammed a heavy fist onto the arm of his command throne. "An insignificant species threatens the Dominion with an empty box. It is an insult!" General Hester stood at the holotank, his hands clasped behind his back. His fur was almost entirely gray, and an old battle scar ran through a cybernetic eye, whose crimson optic whirred as it focused. His low, gravelly voice cut through the Emperor's rage. "Majesty, the human shuttle emitted a paired particle signal pulse when it docked. Our long-range sensors confirm it. The trigger, at least, is real." A tech officer at a nearby console swiveled, his fur bristling. "He's right, Majesty. The signal is faint, but the pairing links it with particle signatures spread throughout the system's outer shell. We can confirm the delivery mechanism is in place, though the payload remains unverified." Cerilius glared, his gaze burning. He stabbed a clawed finger at the hologram of Fallon, a still, small figure in a vast, hostile ship. "Then seize it, Imperial Guard! Storm the room! Take his arm! We will have his toy and his life!" "No," Hester said. The single word cut through the Emperor's fury. Cerilius turned with deliberate slowness, his primary eyes wide. "What did you say, General?" "I said no, Majesty," Hester repeated, his voice even. He met the Emperor's gaze. "The human's commitment is the primary variable. Whether the device is real or a bluff is secondary to the fact that he believes it is real. Rushing the room forces his hand. It guarantees he dies. If the threat is genuine, he takes the system with him. That risk is too high." An aide, a young Chiran diplomat in training, stared at the holotank's swirling representation of the star system. His primary eyes were wide. She looked from the lone human icon to the general. "He's here only to threaten us?" she whispered. Hester focused his cybernetic eye on her, its lens whirring. "No," he confirmed flatly. "He is here to present an ultimatum. He is a message, and his death is the punctuation." Cerilius seethed on his throne, his claws scoring deep grooves into the metal. The veins on his thick neck stood out. The War Diet's other members, the Council of Clan leaders and military commanders, watched, their faces grim. "Fine," Cerilius snarled, spitting the word. "Wait, but I want our science division and our xenohistorians to tear this Jericho protocol apart, discover a weakness, find a way to disable it, and discover for me a reason, any reason at all, to believe this human is lying. Then I will have his head." Back in the hexagonal room, Trevor processed the revelation. He discreetly activated his wrist-mounted data bracer, reviewing the encrypted report from the bridge sensors. The technical language was dense, but the conclusion was simple. Paired particle signal pulse confirmed. The trigger was real. The threat was real. He deactivated the display and stared at the human. An hour passed, measured by the ship's low, humming life support. Trevor studied Fallon. The human sat motionless, his posture relaxed but alert. His breathing was slow and even. His skin showed no sweat. He waited. Trevor heard the slight scuff of a guard's boot outside the door. They were waiting for an order that could doom them all. The Emperor's legendary pride had won battles and forged an empire. That same pride might now be their undoing. At last, Trevor spoke, his voice quiet, stripped of its earlier superiority. "What kind of species," he asked in a low voice, "builds a weapon that guarantees their own destruction alongside their enemies?" Fallon, whose gaze was distant, fixed on him. The colors of his eyes crinkled slightly. "The kind that hates to lose," he said. He shifted slightly in his chair. "Now," he said, "I'd appreciate a bottle of water." The mundane request, following a threat that could extinguish a star, left Trevor speechless. He stared at the human, who had just asked for a drink of water as if they were discussing trade tariffs. Trevor raised his hand deliberately and pressed a small stud on the table's edge. He kept his eyes on the human. Deep within the ship's data core, the Chiran's finest xenohistorians raced against the deadline. The Emperor had given them a single directive: understand humanity's capacity for this threat. They plunged into humanity's public information networks, vast and chaotic archives of a species that seemed to document its every thought and deed. The initial reports filtering back to the bridge were confusing. Humans were physically slight, shorter lifespans than the Chiran, fragile bone structure, limited sensory input. They seemed, on the surface, to be a minor power, posturing far beyond their station. Then the historians dug deeper. They bypassed the endless chatter of entertainment and commerce and found the bedrock of human history. The lead historian, an ancient Chiron named Lycellus, compiled the findings for the war diet. His voice, usually a dry academic drone, was tight as he presented the data on the main bridge view screen. "Majesty, members of the Diet," Lycellus said. His primary and secondary eyes blinked in rapid succession. "Our analysis is troubling." Holographic images filled the space above the holotank. Black and white footage of men charging out of muddy trenches into curtains of machine gun fire. The Somme, Verdun. Lycellus explained the concept of a war of attrition, where they measured victory in the enemy's dead, accepting catastrophic losses of their own. The Chiron, who valued individual glory, found the slaughter's sheer, anonymous scale beyond their comprehension. Next came images of ruined cities. Stalingrad. A voiceover spoke of fighting for every block, every room, until the rubble itself was a contested resource. The Chiron understood territorial warfare, but this was something else. This was a war of extermination fought over symbolic ground. Then came the presentation centerpiece, a grainy film of a mushroom cloud rising over a flattened city. Hiroshima. "They developed weapons of star-like power while still bound to their own planet," Lycellus explained in a hushed voice. "And they used them on cities rather than military targets, twice." He brought up a complex diagram of global alliances from a period the humans called the Cold War. "For nearly half a century, their two primary superpowers held these weapons against each other's throats. They based their entire global strategy on a doctrine they called mutually assured destruction." The Chiron on the bridge stared. The name itself was an obscenity, a concept alien to a culture built on conquest. "They built thousands of these planet-killing weapons," Lycellus continued, "knowing that to use even one would trigger a response that would render their world uninhabitable. And for 50 years, they lived with that constant threat. They normalized the possibility of self-annihilation as a tool of statecraft." He gestured to the final image, a psychological profile compiled by their analysts. "Our conclusion is this. Humans, while physically slight compared to other species we have encountered, possess an unprecedented psychological capacity for self-destructive spite. They will burn down their own home to deny it to an invader. For them, death is more than an outcome of war. It is a weapon they wield. The probability that this soldier, this gunnery Sergeant Fallon, will follow his orders to their logical, catastrophic conclusion is alarmingly high." The historian's feed cut out, leaving a profound silence on the bridge. General Hester looked at the hologram of Fallon, who had just accepted a bottle of water from a service drone. The human drank. He was the product of this history, the living legacy of the Somme, of Stalingrad, of a world that had stared into the abyss and made it a part of its foreign policy. He considered the colony on Meridian a catastrophic investment. Hours later, a Chiron attendant brought food. A silent, cowled figure pushed a cart into the room, placing 2 sealed trays on the table. The figure used a scanner on each tray, a high-pitched whine filling the room. Before backing out in silence, the door sealed shut again. Trevor opened his tray. It contained strips of dried meat and a dense, protein-rich gel. Standard Chiron rations. He looked at Fallon's portion. The contents were identical. Fallon opened his container and ate with the slow, deliberate pace of a soldier who had learned that interruptions could end any meal. They ate in silence for several minutes, the only sound the soft scrape of utensils against the metal trays. "My emperor is an impatient being," Trevor said. Fallon chewed a piece of tough meat, swallowed, and took a sip of water. "Every leader has flaws," he said, meeting Trevor's gaze. But the deflection was, in itself, an answer. He offered a neutral acknowledgement of a universal truth. Trevor watched him, tracking Fallon's throat as he swallowed. He gave a slight nod. Fallon studied the Chiron with equal intensity. Trevor lowered his voice, pitching it just for the two of them, despite the certainty of surveillance. Some flaws are more dangerous than others. A crack in a warrior's armor can be fatal. A crack in an emperor's judgment can shatter an empire. Fallon registered the admission, his expression a neutral mask. He finished his meal, placed the utensil neatly on the empty container, and resumed his watch. 12 hours passed. Fallon felt the first deep, grinding ache of fatigue settling into his bones. A familiar sensation, an old enemy he had battled on countless deployments. He performed a series of silent exercises in his chair, tensing and relaxing muscle groups, rolling his neck, anything to keep the blood flowing and the mind sharp. His most important task was internal. He had to consciously regulate his breathing, keeping his heart rate within the narrow, steady band the biometric cuff's calibration recognized as calm. A spike of adrenaline, a jolt of fear, a lapse into the ragged breathing of exhaustion. The machine's logic could misinterpret any of these. Trevor's voice cut through Fallon's internal focus. The Chiron watched him, tilting his head. What does it mean to be a human warrior? It means discipline, Fallon said. It means following orders. It means doing your duty, whatever the cost. Duty to whom? Your leaders? Your world? To the people you protect, Fallon clarified. To the person standing next to you in the fight. Trevor considered this. A Chiron seeks personal glory. A warrior wins honor in single combat, in leading a charge that breaks the enemy's line. Our sagas are of great heroes, of individuals whose might turns the tide of battle. Your description sounds selfless, anonymous. Wars are won by teamwork, not glory, Fallon countered flatly. Survival does. We fight for the man on our left and the man on our right, because we know they're doing the same for us. It's a closed loop of trust. That's what gets you through the fire. So the honor of a machine, then, Trevor mused. Each cog performing its function. There is an elegance to that, I suppose. The honor of a reliable tool. Fallon shrugged, a small movement of his shoulders. His role was clear, a tool forged by years of training and hardened by experience. Today, his function was to sit in a chair and keep his heart beating at a steady rhythm, the most important mission of his life. A weapon needs a purpose, Fallon said. My purpose is recovering Meridian. Trevor fell silent. Fallon's purpose felt cold and unyielding, a resolve born of something other than the burning passion for conquest or glory. He was beginning to understand the historian's report. This species was beyond intimidation. They could only be killed, and they might take their killer with them. Flood the room with an anesthetic neurotoxin. Put him to sleep, Emperor Cerilius rasped. He paced before his throne, his tail lashing back and forth. A Chiron scientist, a small, nervous specimen from the Biological Warfare Division, flinched.
Majesty, the gas is as likely to cause cardiac arrhythmia as unconsciousness. His heart rate could become erratic. Even a minor fluctuation outside the established baseline might trigger the device. The system's design is fail-deadly.
Then use a high-focus cutting laser, Cerilius snarled, pointing at the hologram. Slice his arm off at the shoulder. Instantaneous. Another scientist, a physicist, shook his head. The thermal shock from a high-yield laser would induce instantaneous cardiac fibrillation, Majesty. His specific heart rhythm keys the device. Any cessation, natural or induced, serves as a trigger. Cerilius spun on General Hester, his gaze burning. This is your fault. Your caution has made us prisoners on our own ship, held hostage by one insignificant primate. Hester stood still, his cybernetic eye glowing. Majesty, he said, his low voice a rumble of dissent.
Your obsession with this single human is jeopardizing the Dominion. He is a symptom. The disease was annexing a colony belonging to a species we knew little about.
He gestured to the star chart.
Withdraw our forces from Meridian. Seed the system. The colony is now a liability. It is worth less than the risk of annihilation. We can find other resources, other worlds ripe for conquest.
Withdraw! Cerilius roared, the insult striking him like a physical strike.
The unyielding resolve only advances. I never yield to threats from vermin. You speak of cowardice, Hester. I speak of survival, the general countered, his voice a low threat. A concept you seem to have forgotten in your quest for glory. The Dominion is more than a single emperor's legacy.
A new tension gripped the bridge. The War Diet's other members shifted their weight, glancing between the Emperor and the General. Cerilius glared at Hester, his chest heaving.
Remember your place, General,
Cerilius hissed, his voice trembling.
You test the limits of my patience.
Hester gave a slow, deliberate blink of his organic eyes. He remained silent. Several Diet members met his gaze and gave slight, almost imperceptible nods. The hours passed. Fallon fought to keep his mind engaged, running through tactical scenarios, reciting the names of every member of his old platoon, anything to stave off the mental fog of sleep deprivation. Why? Trevor asked, his voice pulling Fallon from his thoughts. Why is this single colony so important to you? Our probes showed a minor outpost, a few thousand colonists. Low strategic value? It's an illogical cause to sacrifice yourself for. Fallon was silent for a long moment. He stared at the gray metal of the table, his eyes distant. For the first time, a flicker of something personal crossed his face.
My last assignment before this one was planetary security on Meridian,
he said, his voice quiet. He looked past Trevor at a memory.
I was on the evacuation team. We got most of them out before your fleet arrived. The evacuation was orderly.
He paused, his gaze vacant.
We were loading the last transport. I remember a family, a mother, a father, 2 kids. The youngest, a little girl, she'd fallen and scraped her knee on the tarmac. She was crying, frightened by the blood more than the warships in the sky.
Fallon lifted his head and met Trevor's eyes.
I carried her onto the ship. A little girl with a scraped knee. Her name was Cora.
He stated it as a simple fact, but in the sterile, high-stakes environment of the room, the simple human detail stunned Trevor. Trevor understood. This was about a primal duty, deeper than territory or resources. For the human in front of him, this was about protecting the flock. This was about a promise made, unspoken, to a crying child on a tarmac. The Chiran had faced countless foes, yet none fought from this particular quiet instinct. A ferocity born of protectiveness, a concept alien to the Chiran honor system, fueled by a child, Cora. And Trevor knew, with a certainty that was deeply chilling, that this man would burn a star to keep that promise. 24 hours, a full day had passed since Fallon had walked into this room. A dull headache throbbed behind his eyes, and his joints ached from the enforced stillness. He caught himself on the edge of a microsleep. His head dipped for a fraction of a second before he jerked it back up. The brief lapse sent a jolt of alarm through him. His heart leaped, and he forced himself to take a series of long, slow breaths to bring it back under control. He needed a distraction, something to engage his mind. He reached into a small pocket on his sleeve and pulled out a single worn die, its corners softened with age. He placed it on the table between them.
A game, he said, to pass the time.
Trevor looked at the die, then at Fallon, his expression skeptical. A game of chance? Chiran's strategy relies on skill, on predictable outcomes. We trust our own ability over fate.
This is about more than fate,
Fallon said. He explained the rules of a simple betting contest. Each player would roll the die in secret, then make a claim about the total value of both dice combined. The other player could either accept the claim, raise it, or call the other a liar. Trevor, a being from a culture of grand fleet maneuvers and intricate political strategy, was initially dismissive. The game seemed childishly simple. Yet he agreed to play. They used marks on a spare data bracer to keep score. Fallon won. He won again. And again. After a dozen rounds, Trevor was down by a significant margin. Frustration mounted in the Chiran diplomat. He was intelligent, a master of logic and rhetoric, yet this tired human soldier consistently beat him in a game of simple chance. How? Trevor asked, his voice tight with annoyance after Fallon correctly called his bluff on a high roll. I hide my roll from you. Your luck defies probability. Fallon picked up the die and turned it over in his fingers. The die is secondary, he explained, his voice low and patient. It's about the opponent. Your primary eyes fix on the bracer when you're telling the truth. They flick toward me when you're lying. Your breathing changes, just slightly, when you roll high, and you make a low clicking sound with your jaw when you're bluffing. You've done it 3 times in the last 5 minutes. Trevor sat back, stunned. He was so focused on the game's logic, on the probabilities, that he ignored the human element. Fallon had played the man. For the past hour, the human patiently observed, cataloging and exploiting his tells. The Chiran was both annoyed and deeply impressed. This surpassed the brute force he expected from a warrior. This was the patient, predatory cunning of a hunter who had just demonstrated, in the most trivial way, a complete and predatory awareness. In his private chambers, far from the prying eyes and ears of the Emperor's loyalists on the bridge, General Hester reviewed his plans. The human's continued, immovable presence was the perfect catalyst. Cerilius's paranoia and rage were isolating him, pushing away even his most ardent supporters in the war diet. The time to act was approaching. He composed a coded message, routing it through secure back-channel comms that bypassed the ship's central command network. He sent it to a handful of key clan leaders on the diet, Chiran he had known for decades, warriors who valued the Dominion's survival over a single man's ego. The message was short, a line from an old Chiran naval proverb. The Emperor's pride is a cracked hull. Stand ready for explosive decompression. The replies came back within minutes. Simple acknowledgments. They were ready. The pieces were in place. Hester then brought up Trevor's file. He had chosen Trevor for this assignment personally. The diplomat was honorable, intelligent, and most importantly, loyal to the Chiran people above all else. His loyalty to Cerilius was a formality. His loyalty to the Dominion was his core. Hester trusted that Trevor, trapped in that room with the human embodiment of their dilemma, would come to the correct conclusion on his own. Sending a direct order would be an insult to Trevor's honor and a foolish risk. He had to make the choice himself. The general stood and walked to the armored viewport that looked out into the star-dusted void. He could see the faint, distant shimmer of Meridian's star. Cerilius saw an insult to his authority, a challenge he must crush. Hester saw something different. This was an opportunity. The human was an intractable problem. A sharp blade could sever the knot entirely. Fallon was the perfect unwitting instrument to lance the boil of Cerilius's disastrous reign. The Dominion would bleed, but the purge would cleanse the infection. A low thrum shuddered through the ship. The main lights in the negotiation room flickered, once, twice, then died, plunging the chamber into disorienting darkness. 3 seconds later, emergency power kicked in. Red combat lighting bathed the room in a hellish glow. In that brief moment of total blackness, Trevor had heard it. A sharp, hitched intake of breath from the human. a sound of reflexive alarm. When the red lights came on, Fallon was motionless, his posture unchanged. He sat as he had for more than 30 hours, a figure of placid control. But Trevor's keen gaze registered it. A single bead of sweat traced a path down the man's temple, carving a dark line through the grime of exhaustion. Fallon raised his free hand and wiped it away. The movement was steady, but Trevor saw the slight tremor in his fingers, evidence of sustained, incredible strain. The human was a wire pulled taut to the breaking point. He held the trigger and himself together through sheer, unrelenting will. Trevor remained silent. His observation took on a new gravity. A new, profound understanding settled over him. This was a man, fallible and strained. A man holding the apocalypse on a leash, walking a tightrope over the abyss. And the leash and the rope were fraying with every passing second. For the first time, Trevor felt a sliver of something akin to empathy, a deeply uncomfortable sensation. 46 hours. The air on the bridge was electric with tension. Emperor Cyrilius remained awake. His fur had matted, his eyes bloodshot. He had stared at the hologram of Fallon for 2 days, his pride eroding under the silent, patient gaze of the human. His endurance had reached its limit.
"Enough!"
he bellowed, his voice cracking.
"This farce is over. My authority will be respected on my own vessel."
Hester stepped forward, his expression grim. "Majesty, I implore you, reconsider. A strategic withdrawal is an act of wisdom, of preserving our strength. Let the human go. Let the system go."
"Wisdom?"
Cyrilius spat, turning on him with the fury of a cornered predator.
"You call this groveling weakness wisdom? You are a traitor, Hester. Your nerve has failed."
He pointed a shaking claw at the general.
"Imperial Guard, arrest this coward. Strip him of his command."
This was the signal. As the 2 hulking Imperial guards on the bridge moved to apprehend Hester, the general's voice cut through the air, a single sharp command word in the old Chiron battle tongue.
"Qatar!"
Strike. The bridge's main lights instantly cut out, replaced by the disorienting pulse of red combat lighting. The Chiron warriors from the War Diet security detail, who stood at parade rest in the bridge's shadowed alcoves, moved with lethal speed. Plasma bolts seared the air. The 2 Imperial guards, silhouetted and blindsided, fell before they could draw their weapons. The bridge erupted into a whirlwind of disciplined violence. Diet security forces engaged the Emperor's personal guard in a short, brutal firefight. Cyrilius stared, his mind struggling to comprehend the betrayal. He had lost control. With a final, spiteful snarl, he lunged for the Master Comm panel, shoving a tech officer aside. He slammed his fist on the ship-wide broadcast button, his voice screaming over the sounds of battle.
"To the guards at the negotiation room! Kill the human, now! If I am to fall, let the system burn with me."
In the negotiation room, the ship's alarms blared to life, casting the chamber in strobing red light. The metallic shriek of a general quarters alert echoed through the deck plates. Trevor's personal comm, linked directly to the Emperor, crackled with Cyrilius's final insane order. The words registered their apocalyptic weight. He looked across the table at Fallon, whose face was a grim mask in the flashing lights. The human's hand rested on the briefcase. "My Emperor is a fool," Trevor said, his voice a low, horrified whisper. "He has just killed us all." Fallon's expression was cold iron. "He just made my job easier." The words had just left his mouth when the door to the room exploded inward. A shaped charge blew the lock mechanism to slag, sending the heavy metal panel hurtling across the room to slam into the far wall. 2 massive Imperial guards, clad in ornate golden armor, stormed through the breach. Their energy pikes hummed with lethal power. They moved on Fallon, their target clear. But before Fallon could push his chair back, Trevor launched himself out of his seat, placing himself between the human and the guards.
"The Chiran's fate will outlive a madman!"
He roared, his voice the sound of an avalanche. He intercepted the first guard, catching the energy pike on the armored plating of his forearm. Sparks flew. The impact sent a shudder through his entire body, but he held his ground. He shoved the guard back, creating a precious second of space.
"Down!"
yelled at Fallon, shoving the human and his chair toward the relative cover of the heavy table. The fight was a blur of savage, close-quarters combat. Fallon scrambled behind the table, his focus on protecting the briefcase and his own life from any stray energy discharge. He was vulnerable, his wits his only weapon against two from the Emperor's elite guard. Trevor was a storm of controlled fury. He was a diplomat warrior, and the warrior was now in full command. He ducked under a vicious swing from the first guard and drove his shoulder hard into the Chiran's midsection, sending him staggering back. The second attacker lunged, its pike aimed at Trevor's throat. Trevor pivoted, deflecting the blow with his other arm, the shriek of energy on armor deafening in the small room. He was a master, but it was a 2-on-1 fight, against opponents of equal skill and superior equipment, a desperate delay. Fallon saw his chance. As the first assailant recovered his balance, Fallon kicked out with both feet, shoving the heavy metal table into the Chiran's legs. The warrior, caught off guard by the tactic, roared in surprise and stumbled, his balance broken for a crucial second. The opening was enough. Trevor spun, disengaged from the other assailant, and slammed his fist into the first assailant's helmet, cracking the faceplate. But the second attacker was on him instantly, the butt of his pike catching Trevor in the ribs with a sickening crunch. The diplomat grunted in pain and fell to one knee. The enraged warrior recovered and turned his attention back to the source of his problem. He ignored the kneeling Trevor and advanced on Fallon, who was on the floor behind the table. He raised his pike for a final killing blow. Just as the weapon descended, 3 soldiers in the stark, functional armor of the War Diet security forces appeared in the ruined doorway, their plasma rifles raised. They opened fire. A volley of focused blue-white bolts struck the 2 Imperial guards in the chest and head. The Golden Warriors collapsed to the floor in a heap of smoking ruin. The fight had lasted less than 20 seconds. Trevor pushed himself to his feet, clutching his side, breathing in ragged gasps. He glanced at the dead guards, then at the Diet soldiers in the doorway. He nodded to them once. His gaze fell on Fallon. The human pushed himself up, sweeping the room with his gaze, assessing the situation. He looked at Trevor. "Thanks," he said evenly. "The pleasure was mine," Trevor wheezed, a new authority in his voice. An eerie quiet filled the corridors aboard the unyielding Resolve. The alarms were silent. They walked, Fallon, Trevor, and their escort of 3 Diet soldiers, through the grand passages of the flagship. Evidence of swift, brutal conflict punctuated the silence. They passed the bodies of Imperial guards, their golden armor scorched and blackened. Here and there lay a Diet soldier, a testament that the victory had come at a cost. Trevor led them toward the ship's heart, the Emperor's throne room. The massive double doors stood open, scarred by plasma fire. They stepped inside. The War Diet's silent, grim-faced members, the most powerful clan leaders and generals of the Dominion, filled the cavernous hall. They stood, arranged in a semicircle around the throne. General Hester was before the empty throne itself, his back to them. He was wiping blood from a long ceremonial blade with a piece of silk. The body of Emperor Cyrilius the Unyielding lay at the throne's base, his gaudy rings and fine robes accentuating the final surprised expression on his face. Hester turned as they entered. His armor was scorched, but his posture was steady. His cybernetic optic remained a steady, calm red. He looked past Trevor and fixed his gaze on Fallon.
"Gunnery Sergeant Gavin Fallon,"
Hester said. His voice was level, a calm counterpoint to the momentous events that had just transpired.
"On the Chiran Dominion's behalf, we accept your terms. Our forces are withdrawing from the Meridian system as we speak. We will return the colony to your people, intact."
Fallon took in the scene. The dead Emperor, the bloody blade, the new ruler standing before him, as serene as if he were discussing shipping manifests. The war was over. The standoff was over. He had won. He lifted his free hand, gesturing vaguely at the body on the floor.
"Does this sort of thing happen often?"
he asked. The question was dry, almost conversational. A few of the Diet's members shifted uncomfortably, but Hester's expression remained deadpan.
"When leadership places ego above survival, the body politic has a way of correcting itself."
He paused, then added, his voice tinged with irony.
"We, too, have stories of leaders who mistake the throne for the empire."
Fallon gave a small, tired smile and a slight shrug. The gesture conveyed a wealth of understanding. He'd seen his share of flawed leaders, of ambition and pride leading good people to bad ends. The politics were different, the species was different, but the fundamental flaws were universal.
"All right," Fallon said. "Fair enough."
In the cavernous throne room, surrounded by alien warriors and their slain monarch, the humans' simple acceptance broke the last of the tension. The war ended with a quiet, pragmatic understanding between two soldiers, each aware of the cost of bad leadership. Weeks later, the bar was a quiet oasis in the chaotic hubbub of a neutral trade station. The bar was dark, smelling of spilled liquor and alien chemicals, and the clientele kept to themselves, exactly what Gavin Fallon was looking for. He sat in a booth in the back, nursing a glass of amber liquid that burned in a pleasant way. The briefcase and cuff were gone. A faint, silvery scar on his left wrist remained the physical reminder of his 48 hours. A large figure slid into the booth opposite him, blocking out the light. Fallon was expecting him. He had felt the presence long before it arrived. Trevor. He wore simple, functional clothing, having shed the dark blue sash of his diplomatic rank. He looked leaner, harder, stripped of his old station's trappings. He flagged down a service drone and ordered a drink in his resident baritone. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two veterans sharing a space. The drone delivered Trevor's drink, a viscous green fluid in a tall glass. Trevor raised his drink. "To the most successful negotiation of my career." Fallon clinked his own against it. The sound was a soft, final note.
"I thought I was there to deliver a message."
A rare, genuine smile touched Trevor's lips, a startling expression on his powerful features. "Gunnery Sergeant," he said. His voice held a new warmth, a new respect. "You said more in your silence than most say in a lifetime." They drank. The peace would hold.